Now, knowing we are in charge of our destiny takes us to the next step. Where does our responsibility start? Well, this is coming up next. Let's welcome our next speaker, Suzana Simoes, who will talk about building happiness and peace, a thought at a time. Born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Suzana was raised Spiritist and has been in the United States for 24 years. She is one of the founders of the Conscious Living Spiritist group in Miami, Florida. She's worked 12 years as a board member of the Spiritist Federation of Florida, and this last year as a board member of the United States Spiritist Federation group. Suzana's main area of work is the dissemination of Spiritism in the English language.
Good morning. I have a mission here, keep up the energy level of my dear friend Flavio Zanetti. All right, so we're going to talk about building happiness one thought at a time. And I would like to start by saying that thought is matter and thought matters. How can we understand these two statements is what we are going to try to do in the next 30 minutes. And we are going to do that by revisiting some basic concepts in Spiritism, or perhaps they are not so basic, but we'll try to make them as basic as possible so that we can understand how our thoughts establish our realities and our happiness, and sometimes our misery. So let's start from the beginning, revisiting the concept, the definition of thought with the Spirit Emmanuel in the book Life and Thought. He says that he defines thought as a creative force projected by the person who generates it by means of subtle waves in circuits of action and reaction. I know, what did you just say? Right? But we will explore that little by little. In Genesis, we also learn that thoughts are for the spirits the same thing that our hands are for us. With our hands, we manipulate the world around us. With thoughts, the spirits are able to manipulate, to compose the subtle energy that fills the universe. In the book Mechanics of Mediumship, we learn that the subtle energy is composed by also very, very subtle elements, many of them unknown to us, and many of them that go way beyond those annoying elements, forgive me, that's my bias, that we learn in the periodic table. Perhaps you loved the periodic table when you were in school, not me. So, moving forward, another important concept is the concept that the thoughts that we emit, they have actually a form, they have a specific weight, they have a density, if you will, they have color, and they have also a vibratory frequency. And each one of us have a specific range in which we vibrate, in which we think. The Spirit Emmanuel, in the same book, he will talk about it, saying that the mind is the field of our awakened consciousness, where the evolutionary phase of our knowledge allows us to function. What does that mean? It means that each one of us has a very low point of vibration, of frequency in our thoughts that we experience when we are deeply, deeply identified with the material level. But there are moments in our lives that we reach the highest frequency that we can produce. Those are moments where our actions and thoughts are in line with love. Those are moments where we are praying. Those are moments where we are meditating. Those are moments perhaps when we are undergoing very, very difficult struggles that are transformative, that have the power of bringing some spiritual insight and deeper knowledge about who we are. Those moments where we align what is very essential in our lives, we change our vibration, we change the frequency of our thoughts in a more vertical direction. So each one of us has a range. I have my lowest and my highest. Flavio has his lowest and his highest. And so our perception of life is going to be according to the frequency that we vibrate. Where our thoughts produce is another important concept that we need to visit. So for the materialistic paradigm, thoughts are produced by the brain. But for us in Spiritism, our thoughts are produced by the mind. But aren't they the same? No, not necessarily. Not at all, actually. Because the brain is the physical organ that is going to process and it's going to manifest the ideas, the will, the desires of the spirit, where the mind actually resides. The mind, the compartment that we call mind, according to Andrew Lewis, resides in the spiritual body. And so thoughts are produced by the spirit, not by the brain. The brain manifests our thoughts. Another important concept that Emmanuel brings to us is from our thoughts emerge the threads, generating the causes from which circumstances are born, thus bringing either destruction or liberation to our lives. So, what does that mean? Let's translate Emmanuel from English to English, right? What is he talking about? From our thoughts emerge the threads, generating the causes from which circumstances are born, thus bringing either destruction or liberation to our lives. Okay, so we have our thoughts, we have our ideas, and so if we put two different persons in front of a picture, in front of a circumstance, in front of a person. Let's say that this person is, in general, perceived as someone who's hostile. And two persons are facing these three examples that I put to you. They will be looking exactly at the same external scenario. But their interpretation, their perception, their understanding, their view of the external is going to be different. So we may look at the same picture, and I may see something different than somebody else. We may look at the case presented by Flavio with the child without the arms, and we might have very different reactions to what that means. So what is the difference? The difference, as Flavio said so many times, is not out there. The difference, what determines how we live our lives, is how we see life, how we see what's outside of us. And this is why Emmanuel is going to say that life mirrors the mind. Life mirrors the mind. In other words, the way you perceive life, the way you understand life is a mirror of your inner reality. And this is very powerful and somewhat disturbing. Right? So our thoughts, the frequency of our thoughts, the way that we project our thoughts has everything to do with our inner reality. And it is precisely our psychic and our emotions that determine the quality of our thoughts and the quality of our lives. I said a lot in very little time. So I'm going to summarize the points that I have said before moving forward. I said that we are immersed in subtle energy that fuels the universe. I also told you that the mind creates thoughts, and the mind belongs It's part of the immortal being. I told you that thoughts are a creative force emitted in waves. That with our thoughts we manipulate the energy in the universe. That our thoughts have color, density, and a frequency. And that our thoughts can cause destruction or liberation. And finally, I said that life mirrors the mind. So moving forward and back to the book Mechanics of Mediumship, we learned that God creates, and we create just like God. God creates in a much bigger scale through its wish and the manipulation of the fluid that fills the universe. We do the same thing. And we do the same thing, and when we think, we create thought forms. And I would like to give an example about thought forms. In the book Mediumship, Path to Happiness, not yet translated, by Sueli Calder Schubert, she tells a story about a meeting that she goes to. The meeting in the Spiritual Center was designed specifically to attend people who had had recent losses for death, the death of a loved one, and were having a difficult time coping with the loss of the person. So the meeting was a lecture followed by a visualization. The visualization was always the same. It was a lake, a very beautiful lake, and around the lake there was this very extensive area of grass. So people were invited to go to the lake and to meet with their loved ones at the lake and have a dialogue with them. And then at the end of the meeting, they would exchange impressions. Well, that particular day, during the visualization, she sees on top of the grass a car. And she did everything within her power to remove the car from the grass unsuccessfully. So when he finished the meeting, she shared her experience with the group. And a woman who was at the group, she said, "What car was it and what color was it?" And she said, "It was a black Chevy." She said, "The car is mine." And she's like, how come? "Well, I purchased this car not too long ago. And this car has given me nothing but trouble and problems. It has broken so many times. It has created so many embarrassing situations for me. I'm not a spiritist. I've never been to a spiritual center, but I thought it has to be a spiritual cause. So I decided to come here to see if you guys can help me blessing the car." So I walk into the center and I noticed that you have books where you write names. So I wrote the model of my car and the tag. And throughout the entire meeting, I asked the spirits to please help removing whatever it is so that the car can function again. This is a powerful thought form that was created by the persistence, by the concern of that person, and that a medium who is a little bit more sensitive was able to capture. And it was so solid and so real that she was unable to remove it. My question for you is, what have you been creating? What thoughts are you nourishing consistently, holding in your minds? Because you are creating thought forms. But thoughts go beyond the thought forms outside of us. Thoughts also have an effect in us. So we are made of a material body. We are spirit, which is immaterial, and we have in between a semi-material body, also made of this subtle energy. Therefore, every time we think, this subtle energy in our perispiritual body is sensitive and responds to the nature of our thoughts. So before we create cars on top of grass, that thought first flows through our system, our energetic system. So every time we are nurturing, and pay attention, I'm not saying that you have a thought of anger or a thought of bitterness, but every time we withhold and nurture those thoughts, we are actually baiting our central nervous system, our vascular system. We are putting in our blood cells and taking to every single cell of our body that toxic nature, the toxic vibration of our thoughts, and that's how we are creating for ourselves states of well-being or states of diseases and disorders. But thought does something else. Thought creates our spiritual identity. So there's the concept of aura. The spirits recognize us whether we come here dressed up or not, smiling or not, pretending to be okay when we are not. We have a spiritual identity that does not lie. Because every living being projects energy. We have energy being produced by our cells, and that is being projected, like a plant does as well. But different than a plant, we think, we have a psychic, we have emotions, and so all our experiences and our emotions are also projected together with the biological energy that we are producing, creating our spiritual identity. And this is how we are recognized in the spiritual world. Now let me go back to the beginning definition by Emmanuel, when he says that thought is a creative force projected by means of subtle waves in circuits of action and reaction. That's what we're going to talk about, circuits of action and reaction. And we're going to talk about that using the concept, the very well-known concept of social networks. You can choose whether you want to be on Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. But I'm here to tell you today that you belong to a social network that's called the immortal social network, the social network of minds in the spiritual realm. Whether you want it or not, whether you know it or not, you are part of it. And you are posting every second of your life. And the very scariest thing about this network is there is no privacy option. It's out there all the time. And this network has some principles, important principles that we need to understand. The principle of mental reflex, the principle of affinity, the principle of association, and the principle of reciprocity and influence. We're going to learn about those in 2 minutes, very quickly, but you will get it. So the first thing I would like to talk about is the principle of mental reflex, because according to Emmanuel, the principle of mental reflex is at the core of life. When I read that for the first time, I was like, this sounds very important. Because if it is a principle that's at the very core of life, what does that mean, right? So I went ahead and took some time actually trying to study and understand what Emmanuel meant. And here is the description given in the book. Mental reflex speaks about the dynamics of mental waves, how the mental waves behave, and their reciprocal nature, how they influence one another. Those emitted, the ones that we send, and the ones that we receive after being modified by the effects that they have produced. And I thought, how can I speak about that in a very simple way? Let's go back to Facebook. So when you post on Facebook, you emitted your thought. Well, once the posting's there, it's going to reach all the people who are in your network. And these people are there because they have affinity with you. Some level of affinity. Maybe they like your glasses and decide to be your friend. I don't know. But for some reason, they enter your network because they felt affinity with who you are, how you dress, whatever that might be. All right. So your thought is going to reach and find many other people who have affinity with you. And then it's going to be association. It's going to be interchange of ideas. So people are going to like it. I like it. I like what you're posting. But then beyond that, they are going to add the particularities of their thoughts to your posting. So they're going to comment on it. And there will be an interchange, an exchange of ideas. I put my idea, now you give me some positive feedback back. And then 2 minutes later, if I'm not too anxious that day, I'm going to go there to see who has liked it. And I'm receiving back the posting that I put, my thoughts, now added by the many likes that I receive, by the many comments who have joined my initial thought, and the consequences that those comments had in people's lives. And what happened after that? Isn't that simple? Isn't that freaky? Because now, let's think about real life. We are doing this at all times. Realize that every single idea you post in the universe, because this is a reflex, it's called mental reflex. The very nature of reflex is this, is something that happens automatically without your consciousness. When you go to the doctor and the doctor hits your patella tendon and stretches the fibers of the tendon, you cannot stop. The information goes to your spinal cord, associates with some neurons, and you have a response back. So this is happening, is an automatic process that happens at all times. When I was preparing for this lecture, I thought to myself, I really, really want to quit thinking. Because it's very scary. And so Emmanuel, speaking to that, says, in any opinion we give, we are always, always the sum of many people. And now we understand why. Now, okay, it's a little scary. What can we do about it? So I'm going to propose to you 2 different paths to deal with that. And, you know, some of you know that I live with a psychologist, so I have these psychological terms. And I'm going to say that the first path is a little psychoanalytic, and the second path is behavioral. Meaning, the psychoanalytic path is the path that goes and seeks to fix situations at the very core, at the very source of the problem. And the behavior is like, okay, how can I manage this behavior here and now? The psychoanalytic path goes more or less like this. First thing that is important is to recognize our reality. Okay, we are going to have these thoughts. There's no 2 ways about it. So, but the first important thing is to recognize what is it that we are thinking. What am I producing, right? And the reality that I live in today and now is, as Flavio says, something that I built myself. No one else has created the misery that I find myself in but me. That's the first starting point, and that's why it's so hard to have people who come to Spiritism and stay in Spiritism. That's very uncomfortable, an uncomfortable thought. Have hope, because if you put yourself in this place, it's also within you the possibilities of changing your reality. Watch and pray. Not others. Watch yourself. Right? So it's important that we bring this to our daily lives. We have so many encounters. Sometimes at work, sometimes at the Spirit Center, someone comes and criticizes us in a given moment. And we have that very, very uncomfortable feeling that we call irritation. First step is to understand, is to acknowledge to yourself, say to yourself, I am irritated. This is the first part, the first thing. But you need to recognize, you need to watch your feelings at any given moment. Be prepared, open, and courageous, because in this approach, you're turning the lenses inwards, and you are not necessarily going to feel comfortable with what you see. But it's important that you label the feelings by giving it a name, but don't judge them. Because the very first thing that we do, and that is totally counterproductive in terms of spiritual enlightenment, is to label our feelings. This is good or this is bad. Don't do that. Can you just put a name and bear it? After identifying the feeling, do not rationalize. Oh, I'm a spiritist, I shouldn't be feeling like this. No, don't do that. Don't do that. The gospel says that I should be good. Yes, that will come later. At this moment, acknowledge your humanity and embrace it. After that, if you allow yourself to feel, then be curious. What does this mean? What is this feeling trying to tell me, trying to teach me? What is it truly about? Am I missing something? Am I lacking something? Is there a wound that needs to be healed within me? Pray for guidance. Invest in what is essential, positive thoughts, so that they can be instrumental in assisting you in the process. Be kind and understand that the biggest hurdle for your self-transformation and enlightenment is you. And in the book Mechanics of Mediumship, there is a very powerful passage towards the end where the spirits tell us that the greatest difficulty is that we are very, very comfortable and very used to the vibratory level that we have been living in for many, many, many incarnations. Because people ask me, they say, I want to truly change, but I can't. Yes, you can. It's just hard. It's scary to move to a new place. Although we have been living many times in misery, misery is what we know best. At least we're comfortable over there. And so this is not me saying, the Spirit's telling Mechanics of Mediumship, read the book, the difficult in changing the vibratory level. Practice self-love. And I'm going to pick on my very dear, beloved friend, Daniel Assisi. If you don't know him, you will. All right. And I'm going to pick on him just to give a little example. We were coming together, and I was telling him, how can you do all these things that you do, right? And I could have very well gone to a path to say, oh, but this that he's doing is not so good, and find ways to criticize his work. Not that you guys do that, but it happens to me sometimes. And then the important thing is, when you enter in that mode of thinking, you need to stop, watch myself, not him, and label the feeling. Okay, Suzana, what is this? What's happening? This is called envy. I love you, Danny. This is called envy, right? Okay, so, oh no, I shouldn't feel envy. No, I'm feeling envy. Okay, let me see what envy feels like. Now let me be curious about envy. So why do I feel like this? Is it because I want to be him? Is it because I want to do the things that he is doing? Is it because I want to be seen as he's seen, have the visibility, have the credits? Perhaps I'll feel more worthy if I do all the things that he does. And then you start to be curious. Because every time we start putting someone else's work down, a lot of times, the truth behind it is we're very envious of that work and what that person is actually able to produce. So it's important to be curious about it. And it's important to understand that this is a process, is a moment-to-moment practice. With this curiosity, if we bear the feeling, if we don't rush to rationalize, if we don't rush to explain, if we open space to hear our own soul, perhaps I'm going to realize that there is a wounded child within me that wishes to be seen. And in the moment that I realize the true nature of my pain, then there is a vibratory frequency, a real one. Because now I'm able to cherish him for who he is and what he does, while cherishing myself for who I am and what I do. But obviously, as you can see, this is a very, very long journey. One, not for a lifetime, but for many lifetimes. What do you do in the meantime to decrease the amount of damage that we cause a lot of times with our thinking process? Then we can use a behavioral approach proposed by Emmanuel. in the book Life and Thought, chapter 2, where he talks about the power of will. And he will say that the mind has several departments: desire, intelligence, creativity, memory, but above all, the most important one is the cabinet of will. And he says that we cannot stop the mental reflections. We cannot change miraculously and abruptly where we are in our evolution. It takes time. But we can use will to keep our lives organized and to use all the powers that we have in the direction of good. We can impose upon our reflexes. So what this means is, actually, I don't know if you haven't done this, but kids like to do that. So when you go to the doctor and the doctor is going to hammer your knee, you can actually override the reflex with your will. You can say, I am not going to move my leg. So your will overrides the reflexive action that's taking place. If you focus on it, your leg will not jump. So this is what Emmanuel invites us to do, to practice our will. You will have the thoughts. They are very horizontal in low frequency from time to time. But it's given to you at any given moment the choice to choose to act or not on those thoughts. So I wish you all courage to look at yourselves, love, to embrace yourselves. In a daily practice, take a daily pill of strong will to override, like Paul says, everything is possible for me to do. I can do anything that I want. But at this point in time, if we want to build happiness, we're going to say, but not everything serves me anymore. So work your thoughts in the direction of happiness, one thought at a time. Thank you so much.